The Jesus that the church has talked about and preached about for 2,000 years is the same Jesus. And he's the one who has started this revolution of love and grace that continues, and who calls us to the very values that he preached about, particularly in the Sermon on the Mount, which was an absolutely countercultural sermon. Turned the world upside down. And so, Jesus wanders into the world today. I don't see the message that he would give as any different from the message that he gave 2,000 years ago.
I really think he kept trying to zero in on the individual more than on the group. He wants your heart. He wants to be the center of your life. And if he can get that, then that's what's going to change things. So I think his concern is much more personal, and perhaps his insight is that that's where wars are won. They're won by individuals saying, wait a minute, I don't have to do things the way other people say I have to. I can do it this way. This is a better way. If I do that, I'll do my part. And if everybody jumps in on that, then here we go.
He didn't go picket Rome. Rome at the time that Jesus was here on earth was the most perverted nation maybe of all time. And he didn't say anything about, hey, don't do that. I mean, all of his followers were saying, hey, when are you going to raise up an army and take down those sinners? And he never said that. He said, why don't you worry about yourself? Why don't you worry about your own heart? He was sincerely concerned about an individual. He didn't say anything bad about anybody. It's like, hey, let's just get right with God. Let's just make sure that He is who you're focused on all day, every day, and not your own selfish desires.
Would he be carrying a smartphone? Absolutely. Would he be communicating via the internet? You bet. Because that's the way you have a prophetic voice today.
I think he'd be a layman in every sense of the word. I think he'd be a working man. I don't think he'd make himself known, but he'd be among us. I don't think he'd preach Christianity, but more faith. I think he'd probably learn from the first go around that crucifixion kind of sucks, and I think he'd do whatever to avoid that second time around.
I don't think he'd be wearing a suit and tie. I think he'd have his hands dirty. He'd be out among the people. The Bible says that he came for those that are sick. He says, I didn't come for those that are well. Well people don't need a doctor. He said, sick people need a doctor. And he's the doctor. He's got the cure for what we all have, all the disease of sin that we all have.
Jesus was not partisan in his own day. I can't imagine he would be partisan today.
If Jesus was here today, he'd be the same that he was back then. And that is, he'd be on the societal edge. I mean, he was around the sinners, the tax collectors, the people that nobody trusted, that nobody liked. And I mean, the roughest, toughest people in that society then was the ones he said, all right, you fishermen, you come with me. All right, you're tough enough to hang with me. You don't care what people think of you. You might be able to handle that.
I think Jesus would take sides in terms of values. The issue of racism, for instance. White privilege has kept black people down for decades and decades and decades, and Jesus would say, you can't treat people like that. You've got to recognize what's going on in your lives.
Can't think of an incident where Jesus said we ought to vote for this law, or whatever the equivalent of that would have been in his day. There are plenty of opportunities where he's telling the crowd, you need to live differently. You need to take care of people differently. So I don't know that he was out to change legislation as much as he was out to change hearts.
He wouldn't be Joel Osteen. He wouldn't have a $5 million home in Dallas. You know what I mean?
In the United States, religion always plays an important role.
Jesus would be so disgusted with the whole system. I don't know who he'd vote for.
Well, I would think he would probably be a Democrat, just because he wants to help more people.
Well, my gut wants to answer that question this way. Of course he would vote, because that's what good Americans do.
Jesus pulled the lever on the person that was listening to God. Jesus would do something that Americans don't spend near enough time doing, and that is to get to know the heart of the people that are representing them.
I suspect he might actually prefer to be in a position where he's not allowed to vote, because he was not a supporter of others. Other people followed him.
The parties have gotten all excited about religion for a while, particularly the Republicans, as they've tried to reach out to evangelical voters and others. And then Democrats said, oh man, we got to do that. And Obama tried some of that. I see less of that this time, and partly because of the growing diversity of the American electorate.
Well, you definitely want a Christian leader that's going to follow God's principles. That's what you want. That's not always a choice you have, but that's what you want.
I would say Republican.
Nor would I say Jesus would be a Democrat, Jesus would be a Republican. Those terms, I think, don't help.